The world of professional wrestling came to a complete standstill on a night that was supposed to celebrate survival, competition, and the unbreakable spirit of sports entertainment. Instead, Survival Series became the setting for one of the most vicious and calculated attacks in recent WWE history, an assault so brutal that it sent shockwaves through the entire wrestling community and left one of the industry's most powerful figures completely broken. This wasn't just another storyline twist or scripted moment of drama. This was real fear, real emotion, and real consequences that nobody saw coming. Triple H, the cerebral assassin himself, the man who has stared down legends and never flinched, the executive who has rebuilt WWE's foundation with an iron will and unwavering vision, was reduced to tears when he received the news. Picture this: Paul Levesque, the suited corporate leader who commands boardrooms with the same intensity he once commanded the ring, sitting alone in his office, phone in hand, as the words came through that would shatter his composure completely. CM Punk, the best in the world, the voice of the voiceless, the man who changed the game forever, had been targeted in an attack so savage that even hardened WWE veterans were struggling to process what they'd witnessed. But who would dare to attack CM Punk in such a cowardly fashion? Who possessed both the audacity and the calculated cruelty to strike when Punk was most vulnerable? The masked attacker had moved with precision, with purpose, with a level of brutality that suggested this wasn't opportunistic violence but rather a meticulously planned execution. The wrestling world has seen countless attacks over the decades, from Stone Cold Steve Austin being run over to Bret Hart's Montreal Screwjob, but something about this felt different. Something about the methodical nature of the assault, the timing, the sheer viciousness of it all, suggested that this was personal in ways that transcended typical wrestling rivalry. The footage that emerged from Survival Series told a story that words could barely capture. CM Punk, fresh from what should have been a triumphant night, was ambushed in a corridor backstage. The masked figure appeared from nowhere, moving like a shadow given human form, and what followed was not a fight but an annihilation. Punk, one of the toughest competitors to ever lace up boots, was given no chance to defend himself. The attacker struck with weapons, with fury, with an intensity that suggested years of pent-up rage being unleashed in mere minutes. Security footage showed Punk crumpling under the assault, his body absorbing blow after devastating blow, and by the time WWE officials arrived, the damage had been catastrophically done. Triple H received the call while still processing the night's events. According to sources close to the situation, he had been reviewing match footage when his phone rang, and the voice on the other end delivered news that no one in WWE leadership ever wants to hear. "It's Punk. He's down. It's bad." Those simple words carried the weight of 1,000 nightmares. Hunter's face, witnesses reported, went from focused concentration to absolute horror in seconds. He immediately abandoned everything and rushed to get more information, but what he learned only made everything worse. CM Punk wasn't just hurt. He had been brutalized in a way that raised serious questions about his immediate health, his future in the company, and whether this attack might have consequences that extended far beyond a hospital stay. The relationship between Triple H and CM Punk has been one of professional wrestling's most complex narratives. They've been rivals, they've been at odds over creative direction, they've had their publicized disagreements that became part of wrestling lore. But beneath all of that existed something that outsiders often fail to understand: a deep professional respect forged in the fires of this brutal industry. Both men understand what it means to sacrifice everything for this business. Both have bled for WWE, both have given years of their lives to entertaining millions, and both have pushed their bodies to limits that most people cannot fathom. When you share that kind of bond, forged through pain and perseverance, the news of such a vicious attack doesn't just register as corporate concern or storyline development. It hits like a personal tragedy. Could this be the work of someone from Punk's past, someone whose grudge ran so deep that violence became the only language they could speak? The wrestling world immediately began speculating, connecting dots, revisiting old feuds and bitter departures. CM Punk's career has been defined by controversy, by speaking uncomfortable truths, by refusing to play the political games that others mastered. He made enemies, powerful enemies, people who might have waited years for the perfect moment to strike. Or was this something entirely new, a threat that nobody saw developing, a masked figure whose identity would prove to be the most shocking revelation of all? Triple H's tears weren't just about the attack itself. They represented something far more profound, something that wrestling fans who only see the scripted drama might not immediately understand. They represented the weight of leadership, the crushing responsibility of being the man in charge when something goes catastrophically wrong. Hunter has positioned himself as the guardian of WWE's future, the architect of a new era where talent is protected and valued. This attack happened on his watch, in his company, to a man whose return to WWE had been one of Hunter's proudest achievements. The guilt, the anger, the helplessness of not being able to prevent such brutality, all of it came crashing down in that moment. The emergency response was immediate, but the damage had already been done. Paramedics worked frantically on CM Punk while WWE's entire backstage area descended into controlled chaos. Wrestlers who had been celebrating their own matches moments before now stood in stunned silence. Some of Punk's closest friends in the locker room reportedly had to be physically restrained from rushing through the arena looking for the masked attacker. The perpetrator had vanished like smoke, leaving only destruction in their wake and a trail of questions that seemed to multiply with every passing minute. What could drive someone to such extreme violence? What kind of hatred burns so intensely that only this level of brutality could satisfy it? The medical report, when it finally reached Triple H, painted a picture that was somehow both better and worse than feared. CM Punk had survived, but the extent of his injuries suggested that the masked attacker had targeted specific areas with disturbing knowledge of how to inflict maximum damage. Witnesses reported that Hunter had to steady himself against a wall when he read the list of injuries, his hand shaking, his jaw clenched so tight that people feared he might crack his teeth. This wasn't just a beating. This was an attempt to end a career, to destroy not just a man but everything he represented. The tears came later, when the cameras were gone and the immediate crisis had passed into that terrible waiting period where all you can do is hope. Triple H, alone in his office, finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Associates who saw him in those private moments described a man completely shattered, not by weakness but by the profound recognition that someone he respected, someone who had trusted WWE's promise of safety and professional conduct, had been violated in the most brutal way imaginable. The sobs were described as deep and wrenching, the kind that come from a place of genuine anguish that no amount of corporate training or executive experience can prepare you for. But even in his grief, even through his tears, something else was building in Triple H, something dangerous and focused. Something that suggested this story was far from over. Because the man who cried for his fallen colleague was also the King of Kings, the Game, someone who has built an entire legacy on the principle that every action has consequences. And whoever put that mask on, whoever decided that attacking CM Punk was somehow justified, had just made the biggest mistake of their entire life. They had awakened something in Triple H that the corporate suits and executive meetings had never fully suppressed. The competitor, the fighter, the man who never forgot and never forgave when someone crossed a line that should never be crossed. To truly understand why Triple H's reaction was so profound, so deeply emotional, you have to journey back through the complicated history these two men share. This wasn't just a boss upset about an employee getting hurt. This was something far more complex, a relationship that had evolved through conflict, respect, rivalry, and ultimately a recognition that they were both fighting for the same thing, the legacy and future of professional wrestling itself. The first time CM Punk and Triple H really clashed wasn't in a ring but in a creative meeting, years ago, when Punk was still the rebellious voice challenging WWE's established order. According to people who were in that room, Punk looked across the table at Hunter and said something that few people would ever dare. He told the Game that he was wrong. Not just wrong about a storyline or a match finish, but fundamentally wrong about the direction WWE needed to go. The room went silent. Triple H, who had dismantled legends and dominated WWE for years, just stared at this relative newcomer who had the audacity to challenge him so directly. What happened next revealed everything you need to know about why their relationship became so significant. Hunter didn't explode. He didn't shut Punk down or pull rank. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "Convince me." And Punk did. For the next hour, they went back and forth, two brilliant wrestling minds dissecting the business they both loved, finding common ground in unexpected places and discovering that beneath their surface differences, they shared a fundamental belief. Wrestling deserved better than the complacent, predictable product it had become. That meeting became the foundation for something remarkable. Yes, they clashed repeatedly over the years. Yes, there were moments when their creative visions seemed irreconcilable, when Punk's anti-authority stance collided head-on with Hunter's role as WWE's standard-bearer. But even in their most heated disagreements, there was always an undercurrent of mutual respect. They recognized each other as students of the game, as people who had studied wrestling's history and understood its potential in ways that transcended simple entertainment. The famous pipe bomb promo that changed wrestling forever? Triple H was one of the few people backstage who immediately understood its significance. While others panicked about Punk going off script, Hunter recognized it for what it was, a seismic shift in how WWE connected with its audience. He reportedly told Vince McMahon, "This is what the business needs. This is real." That endorsement from the game gave Punk protection to continue pushing boundaries, to keep speaking uncomfortable truths that made WWE better even when they made executives uncomfortable. But their relationship wasn't just about creative collaboration. It was forged through the unique bonds that only professional wrestlers truly understand. They shared the experience of performing through injuries that would hospitalize normal people, of traveling 300 days a year, of sacrificing relationships and health for the roar of the crowd. Triple H had been where Punk was, fighting the same battles against the same institutional inertia. When Punk walked away from WWE in 2014, bitter and burned out, Hunter was one of the few people who truly understood why. He didn't agree with the decision, but he understood the exhaustion, the frustration, the feeling that your passion was being commodified and controlled in ways that violated everything you believed wrestling should be. The years between Punk's departure and his eventual return were marked by public silence but private respect. People close to both men reported that Hunter would occasionally ask about Punk, wondering if he was happy, if he'd found what he was looking for outside WWE's ecosystem. And when the possibility of Punk's return began to materialize, it was Triple H who championed it internally, who argued that bringing back the voice of the voiceless wasn't just good business but the right thing to do. "We need him," Hunter reportedly told other executives. "The locker room needs him. The fans need him. And maybe we need to prove that we've learned from our mistakes." Punk's return to WWE was one of the most emotionally charged moments in recent wrestling history, and very few people know that Triple H personally called him before the announcement went public. The conversation, according to sources, wasn't about contracts or creative plans. It was two men, both older and hopefully wiser, acknowledging what they'd been through together and what they could build moving forward. Hunter reportedly told Punk, "I promise you, this time it's different. This time we protect you, we value you, we give you the platform you deserve." Punk's response was simple, "I'm trusting you." That promise made the attack at Survivor Series even more devastating for Triple H. This wasn't just a failure of security or a storyline gone wrong. This was a personal betrayal of a promise he had made, a guarantee of safety that had been violently shattered. When Hunter broke down in tears, part of what he was grieving was the broken trust, the knowledge that he had looked Punk in the eye and promised him something he ultimately couldn't deliver. The wrestling industry has always operated on a code that outsiders struggle to fully comprehend. You take care of your brothers in the ring. You protect each other, even when you're supposed to be enemies. The greatest workers in history built that trust through countless matches where one wrong move could end a career or worse. Triple H and CM Punk had that trust, built through main events and brutal matches where they pushed each other to be better, to tell better stories, to give audiences moments they would never forget. They had bled together, literally and figuratively, in pursuit of wrestling excellence. Some of WWE's most memorable moments came from the creative tension between Hunter's old-school appreciation for wrestling tradition and Punk's punk rock desire to burn down everything that felt stale or phony. Their 2011 program, where Punk positioned himself against the game and everything he represented, produced television that felt genuinely unpredictable. Behind the scenes, they would argue about every detail, fighting for their vision while ultimately trusting each other to deliver when the cameras rolled. That's the kind of professional relationship that transcends typical workplace dynamics. That's brotherhood forged through shared sacrifice and mutual respect. Could the masked attacker be someone who resented that brotherhood, someone who saw Punk's return and Triple H's support as a betrayal of some twisted principle? The reaction from other WWE superstars revealed just how deeply both men were respected within the locker room. Veterans who had worked with both Hunter and Punk spoke publicly about their shock and anger, about how this attack violated everything the business was supposed to stand for. Younger wrestlers who had been mentored by both men expressed their fear and confusion, wondering how they could trust the promises of safety and professionalism when something this brutal could happen to someone as experienced and protected as CM Punk. Triple H's tears also represented grief for the era both men represented, a time when wrestling felt dangerous and unpredictable in the best possible way. They had both been at the center of wrestling's most creative periods, pushing boundaries, taking risks, refusing to accept that the business had peaked and could only decline. The attack felt like an assault not just on Punk's body but on everything they had built together, every belief they shared about what wrestling could and should be. In the days following the attack, as Triple H navigated between his corporate responsibilities and his personal anguish, people close to him noticed a transformation. The tears gave way to something harder, something focused and dangerous. He began personally reviewing every second of security footage, interviewing every person who was backstage that night, building a case against the masked attacker with the same methodical intensity he once brought to preparing for WrestleMania main events. This wasn't just a CEO doing due diligence. This was the game preparing for war, and everyone in WWE knew that when Hunter got that look in his eyes, when his jaw set that way and his voice dropped to that particular register, someone was going to pay a terrible price. The relationship between Triple H and CM Punk had always been defined by honesty, even brutal honesty. They didn't sugarcoat things for each other. They called out perceived weaknesses, challenged each other's assumptions, pushed each other to be better than they thought they could be. That honesty made their professional relationship incredibly productive and their personal bond genuinely meaningful. It also meant that Hunter's grief wasn't performative or exaggerated. This was real pain for a real friend, dressed up in corporate language and executive responsibility, but fundamentally about one man's anguish over another man's suffering. The brotherhood that defined their era wasn't built on always agreeing or always getting along. It was built on showing up, on doing the work, on respecting the business and each other enough to tell hard truths when necessary. It was built on the understanding that wrestling was bigger than any one person's ego, that the real enemy was complacency and mediocrity, not each other. The masked attacker, whoever they were, had violated that code in the most fundamental way possible. They had turned what should be a competitive but safe environment into a hunting ground. They had taken the trust that makes professional wrestling possible and weaponized it into an ambush. As Triple H sat in that office, tears streaming down his face, he wasn't just crying for CM Punk's injuries. He was crying for broken promises, for violated trust, for the knowledge that the business he loved and had given everything to protect had been turned into something ugly and dangerous in ways that transcended storytelling and entertainment. He was crying because he had looked Punk in the eye and promised him safety, and someone wearing a mask had turned that promise into a lie written in blood and brutality. But the tears would dry. The grief would transform. And the man who emerged from that office would be neither the corporate executive nor the retired superstar, but something far more dangerous. The Game, operating with the full resources of WWE's empire, focused on one singular goal: finding the masked attacker and making them understand exactly what they had unleashed. The investigation into the masked attacker's identity became Triple H's obsession, consuming every waking moment as he transformed WWE's entire infrastructure into a machine designed for one purpose: unmasking the coward who had brutalized CM Punk. This wasn't just a storyline unfolding on television anymore. Behind the scenes, Triple H had mobilized resources that would make actual law enforcement agencies jealous, turning WWE's production capabilities, security apparatus, and global network of contacts into an investigative task force that would make the perpetrator's anonymity impossible to maintain. The first 48 hours after the attack were critical, and Hunter knew it. He personally stationed himself in WWE's security center, reviewing footage from every angle, every camera, every possible vantage point that might have captured something useful. The masked attacker had been careful, avoiding direct camera exposure, moving through blind spots with the precision of someone who knew WWE's backstage layout intimately. That detail alone was chilling because it suggested the attacker wasn't some random outsider who had infiltrated Survival Series. This was someone with inside knowledge, someone who had walked those corridors before, someone who knew exactly where the cameras were and how to avoid them. But Triple H had spent decades studying opponents, learning to identify patterns that others missed, recognizing tells that gave away intentions before they became actions. He watched the footage hundreds of times, noting the attackers' movement patterns, their body language, the way they favored certain strike angles. Wrestling knowledge became an investigative tool as Hunter began to narrow down possibilities. The attacker moved like a trained wrestler, someone with professional experience who understood how to generate maximum force with minimal telegraphing. The weapon selection showed forethought and brutal efficiency. This wasn't random violence or emotional outburst. This was calculated, professional, and terrifyingly personal. The wrestling world became consumed with speculation about the masked attacker's identity. Every social media platform exploded with theories, ranging from plausible to completely absurd. Was it someone from Punk's AEW past, still bitter about how his departure unfolded? Could it be a WWE superstar who resented Punk's return and the spotlight it stole? Some theories ventured into darker territory, suggesting wrestling personalities who had completely disappeared from public view, nursing grudges that had festered for years into murderous obsession. Triple H monitored all of it, knowing that sometimes the most useful information came from unexpected sources, that wrestling fans' obsessive attention to detail could occasionally spot connections that professional investigators missed. But Hunter's most valuable resource wasn't technology or public speculation. It was the locker room itself, the brotherhood of wrestlers who were equally outraged by this attack on one of their own.